Hey everyone, it's Mercy from Bible Tea with Mercy. And for day 21 of the 90-day Bible reading challenge, we read 1 Kings chapter 7 to 22. We see that Solomon creates a temple for the Israelites to go worship the Lord and sacrifice their burnt offerings to the Lord. Chapter 9 says, So Solomon finished building the temple of the Lord, as well as the royal palace. He completed everything he had planned to do. Then the Lord appeared to Solomon a second time, as he had done before at Gibeon. The Lord said to him, I have heard your prayer and your petition. I have set this temple apart to be holy, this place you have built, where my name will be honored forever. I will always watch over it, for it is dear to my heart. As for you, if you will follow me with integrity and godliness, as David your father did, obeying all my commands, decrees, and regulations, then I will establish the throne of your dynasty over Israel forever. For I made this promise to your father David, one of your descendants will always sit on the throne of Israel. But if you or your descendants abandon me and disobey the commands and decrees I have given you, and if you serve and worship other gods, then I will uproot Israel from this land that I have given them. I will reject this temple that I have made holy to honor my name. I will make Israel an object of mockery and ridicule among the nations. And though this temple is impressive now, all who pass by will be appalled and will gasp in horror. They will ask, why did the Lord do such terrible things to this land and to this temple? And the answer will be, because his people abandoned the Lord their God, who brought their ancestors out of Egypt, and they worshipped other gods instead and bowed down to them. That is why the Lord has brought all these disasters on them. So we see that here the Lord accepts Solomon's we see that the Lord accepts the temple that Solomon built for the Lord. And we see that the Lord only asks of Solomon to follow his commands, decrees, and regulations. The Lord is just looking for obedience from Solomon, and he told Solomon that as long as he obeys him, he will always be with him. So we see that when we obey everything the Lord tells us with all our heart, the Lord will bless us and help us through everything. The Lord won't abandon us as long as we're obeying everything that he tells us and he wants from us. And then we also see that the Lord told Solomon that if he disobeys and turns his back against the Lord, that he will abandon them and the temple will no longer seem beautiful to anyone. And so we know that there is consequences when we disobey the Lord and what he asks of us. Solomon was really good for a long time. He was always obeying the Lord and doing his best for the Lord, and his wisdom was great. But there was a point where Solomon did fail the Lord, and that's in chapter 11. It says, Now King Solomon loved many foreign women. Besides Pharaoh's daughter, he married women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and from among the Hittites. The Lord had clearly instructed the people of Israel, You must not marry them, because they will turn your hearts to their gods. Yet Solomon insisted on loving them anyway. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and in fact they did turn his heart away from the Lord. In Solomon's old age, they turned his heart to worship other gods instead of being completely faithful to the Lord his God, as his father David had been. Solomon worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. In this way, Solomon did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He refused to follow the Lord completely, as his father David had done. On the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, he even built a pagan shrine for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and another for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. Solomon built such shrines for all his foreign wives, to use for burning incense and sacrificing to their gods. The Lord was very angry with Solomon, for his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. He had warned Solomon especially about worshipping other gods, But Solomon did not listen to the Lord's command. So now the Lord said to him, "Since you have not kept my covenant and have disobeyed my decrees, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your servants. But for the sake of your father David, I will not do this while you are still alive. I will take the kingdom away from your son, and even so I will not take away the entire kingdom. I will let him be king of one tribe for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem, a chosen city." So Solomon did exactly what the Lord told him not to do, which was the Lord told him not to marry women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and from the Hittites, because they would turn the Israelites' hearts away from the Lord and have them serve their gods. To begin with, Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. First, that wasn't okay, first of all. Now we know that you're supposed to have one person and one person only. If you're a woman, you have one husband and one husband only. And then if you're a guy, you have one wife and one wife only. You can't have more than one. That's first of all sin. And that's just not okay to begin with. And then, well, Solomon went and married all these women from all these places that the Lord told him not to marry. And the Lord told him that because they would turn Solomon's heart away from the Lord. And at the end of verse 3, it says, "And in fact, they did turn his heart away from the Lord." All Solomon had to do was believe the Lord and obey the Lord, because the Lord knew exactly what they would do to Solomon and exactly what would happen. So let's make sure to always follow the Lord's word when he tells us, when he speaks to us. Let's always make sure to ask the Lord for guidance in our lives, because God knows what's best for us. He just knows exactly what we need and what we don't need, and what is going to affect us in a negative way and what is going to affect us in a positive way. So let's always obey the Lord, so we don't put ourselves through suffrage, through pain that's unnecessary, because the Lord warns us about these things beforehand. So again, we see that there's always consequences for disobeying the Lord. The consequence for Solomon was that the kingdom was going to be taken away from his hands and from his descendants. But for the sake of David, Solomon's son would be king over one tribe. And we see that the Lord keeps his promise to David, that says that one of his descendants will always sit on the throne. Only the kingdom for Solomon's son won't be as big as it was for David or Solomon, because of Solomon's disobedience to the Lord. Something very important that popped out to me from this reading was in chapter 12. It says, But Rehoboam rejected the advice of the older men and instead asked the opinion of the young men who had grown up with him and were now his advisors. "What is your advice?" he asked them. "How should I answer these people who want me to lighten the burdens imposed by my father?" The young men replied, "This is what you should tell those complainers who want a lighter burden. My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. Yes, my father laid heavy burdens on you, but I am going to make them even heavier. My father beat you up with whips, but I will beat you up with scorpions." 3 days later, Jeroboam and all the people returned to hear Rehoboam's decision, just as the king had ordered. But Rehoboam spoke harshly to the people, for he rejected the advice of the older counselors and followed the counsel of his younger advisors. He told the people, "My father laid heavy burdens on you, but I am going to make them even heavier. My father beat you with whips, but I will beat you with scorpions." So the king paid no attention to the people. This turn of events was the will of the Lord, fulfill the Lord's message to Jeroboam, son of Nebat, through the prophet Ahijah from Shiloh. When all Israel realized that the king had refused to listen to them, they responded, "Down with the dynasty of David. We have no interest in the son of Jesse. Back to your homes, O Israel. Look out for your own house, O David." So we see that Rehoboam asked for advice from the elders and from the young people who were his same age and who he had grown up with. We see that the elders gave him great advice that would help him. And we see that the young people gave him bad advice that would only impact the people in a negative way. The elders knew what they were talking about because they had more knowledge, they had lived for longer times, they had seen more things. But the young people were the same age as him and hadn't experienced many things yet. Then they gave him bad advice. So we always have to be careful who we seek for advice. Because we can't go seeking for advice from teenagers like us. Because we haven't lived much yet. Sometimes as teens, we don't give the greatest advice because we haven't lived. We don't know much. And sometimes adults will also give you bad advice. So you always have to be careful who you seek for advice. Because if that advice takes you away from the Lord, then it's not right. We always have to look for wise people that will give us good advice. Advice that won't make us go away from the Lord. And advice that we have to look for advice that pleases the Lord and that glorifies the Lord. Because in everything we do, we have to make sure we glorify the Lord and that the Lord won't get upset with our actions. So remember, always be careful who we seek for advice. Chapter 17. Let's read chapter 17. It says, "Now Elijah, who was from Tishbe in Gilead, told King Ahab, As surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, the God I serve, there will be no dew or rain during the next few years until I give the word." Then the Lord said to Elijah, "Go to the east and hide by Cherith brook, near where it enters the Jordan River. Drink from the brook and eat what the ravens bring you, for I have commanded them to bring you food." So Elijah did as the Lord told him and camped beside Cherith brook, east of the Jordan. The ravens brought him bread and meat each morning and evening, and he drank from the brook. But after a while the brook dried up, for there was no rainfall anywhere in the land. We see here that the Lord commanded the ravens to take food to Elijah every morning. Elijah didn't like a meal because God had the ravens taking food for Elijah every morning. We see that the Lord takes care of us. The Lord takes care of his people. The Lord will give us exactly what we need when we need it. He knows everything, and he knows when we need something. And when we need something, he will provide it. In verse 8, it's the widow at Zarephath. It says, "Then the Lord said to Elijah, Go and live in the village of Zarephath, near the city of Zidon. I have instructed a widow there to feed you." So he went to Zarephath. As he arrived at the gates of the village, he saw a widow gathering sticks, and he asked her, "Would you please bring me a little water in a cup?" As she was going to get it, he called to her, "Bring me a bite of bread too." But she said, "I swear by the Lord your God that I don't have a single piece of bread in the house, and I have only a handful of flour left in the jar and a little cooking oil in the bottom of the jug. I was just gathering a few sticks to cook this last meal, and then my son and I will die." But Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go ahead and do just what you said, but make a little bread for me first. Then use what's left to prepare a meal for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. There will always be flour and olive oil left in your containers until the time when the Lord sends rain and the crops grow again." So she did as Elijah said, and she and Elijah and her family continued to eat for many days. There was only enough flour and olive oil left in the containers, just as the Lord had promised through Elijah. Sometime later, the woman's son became sick. He grew worse and worse, and finally he died. Then she said to Elijah, "O man of God, what have you done to me? Have you come here to point out my sins and kill my son?" But Elijah replied, "Give me your son." And he took the child's body from her arms, carried him up the stairs to the room where he was staying, and laid the body on his bed. Then Elijah cried out to the Lord, "O Lord my God, why have you brought tragedy to this widow who has opened her home to me, causing her son to die?" And he stretched himself out over the child 3 times and cried out to the Lord, "O Lord my God, please let this child's life return to him." The Lord heard Elijah's prayer, and the life of the child returned, and he revived. Then Elijah brought him down from the upper room and gave him to his mother. "Look," he said, "your son is alive." Then the woman told Elijah, "Now I know for sure that you are a man of God, and that the Lord truly speaks through you." Let's begin. So at the beginning of this story, we see that the widow was preparing her last meal for her and her son to die because they had no food left over. But we see that Elijah tells her to make him a bit of bread and then make some for herself, because the Lord will always be there providing for her. The Lord won't let her ingredients run out. She will always have food on her table for her and for her son. The Lord wants to bless us. We just have to believe and obey His word. We see that this widow obeyed and did exactly what Elijah told her to do, and the Lord fulfilled His promise to her. She never lacked food. She always had flour and olive oil to make herself and her son bread to eat. Then in verse 24 it says, "Then the woman told Elijah, 'Now I know for sure that you are a man of God, and that the Lord truly speaks to you.'" At the beginning, when her son first died, she didn't understand what was going on. She just felt pain, and she was a bit angry at Elijah because she thought that Elijah had caused her son's death. But that wasn't the case. The Lord was using both of these things to show her that He was that He was powerful, and also to show her that the Lord spoke through Elijah. Sometimes the Lord has to do things in order for us and others to believe in Him. This gave the widow faith in the Lord, and this probably strengthened Elijah's faith in the Lord. But seeing these 2 miracles that the Lord did with the widow, first the olive oil and the flour never ran out for them, and then we see that the Lord revived the widow's son. So these things were probably not understandable for the widow at the beginning, but at the end she was able to understand what the Lord was doing. She believed now that Elijah was a man of God, and that the Lord spoke through Elijah. So the Lord just makes us go through stuff. The Lord does things in order for us and others to believe in Him. Chapter 18, verse 18 says, "I have made no trouble for Israel." Elijah replied, "You and your family are the troublemakers, for you have refused to obey the commands of the Lord and have worshipped the images of Baal instead." So here we see that Ahab was blaming Elijah for his troubles, but here Elijah tells him that they cause themselves problems by not obeying the Lord. So sometimes people complain against the Lord because stuff goes wrong, stuff don't work out how they want it. But truly, sometimes it's just their disobedience in the Lord. Sometimes people don't believe in the Lord, and then stuff goes wrong, and then they complain against the Lord. But are they truly believing in the Lord? Because if they believed Because if they truly believed in the Lord, they wouldn't be complaining about these things. Because even through pain and suffrage, when we believe in the Lord, we know that at the end everything will work out fine, and at the end everything will be okay. And we know that the Lord uses our pains to teach us something new. That is it for day 21 of the 90-day Bible reading challenge. God bless.